This episode of Bright Hearth is brought to you by Backwards Planning Financial, Indigo Sundry Soap Company, Live Oak Integrative Health, A Well-Worn Story, Gray Toad Tallow, and by our supporters at patreon.com. Anti-fascism and anti-totalitarianism inspired a general theory of society. That theory has many forms, some explicit, others tacit, but it is characterized by a fundamental judgment. Whatever is strong loves and strong truths leads to oppression, while liberty and prosperity require the reign of weak loves and weak truths. In the shadow of Auschwitz, this general theory has encouraged the development of a variety of anti-metaphysical philosophies and critical therapies. They are familiar to us today. When someone prefaces remarks, speaking from a white male first world perspective, he is warding off politically correct attacks with a gesture of piety to the weak gods. The same pattern of weakening characterizes the dictatorship of relativism, reduction to sociobiology and economic analysis, and globalist ideologies. As Richard Weaver wrote in the first sentence of the first chapter of his post-war cri de coeur, Ideas Have Consequences, every man participating in a culture has three levels of conscious reflection: his specific ideas of things, his general beliefs or convictions, and his metaphysical dream of the world. I contend that the post-war era saw a shift in our metaphysical dreams to openness and a lightness of being in response to the decades of catastrophe in the first half of the 20th century. Excerpt from Return of the Strong Gods, Nationalism, Populism, and the Future of the West by R.R. Reno. Well, welcome back to another episode of Bright Hearth, everybody. We are glad that you have joined us this evening. Babe, how are you doing? Before I welcome everybody else, actually, even though I already have.
Very glad to
Welcome.
be here.
You look like you're so stoked that it's...
I look like what?
You look like it's not 8:20 p.m.
Actually, this is the end of a week of tummy bugs in our house.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, and right before we started recording, Lexi said...
It's not Friday. I was hoping it was Friday. Dang.
It's not.
It's not the end, guys.
Right. So we've had people throwing up all week, and then right before we started recording, or I was getting ready here to start, Lexi was like, I'm not feeling very good. So she said...
We'll see.
Let's
I'm
finish
okay right now. Here we go.
Before anybody throws up, whether in or out of our room. So this episode, luckily for you, babe, is one where maybe I will talk a lot, I suppose. But I do really want to hear your thoughts on this too.
You mentioned Richard Weaver. I love Richard Weaver.
So we are talking in this episode of Bright Hearth about something maybe at the beginning of that, the cold open, you might have been somewhat confused. Like, what is... Hang on, they're talking about post-war consensus. They're talking about all sorts of political-sounding things. I thought this was Bright Hearth. This is like a podcast about homemaking and the good, the true, and the beautiful in the home. And it is, but I thought it was really important that we unpack one of the concepts that has really shaped the last many decades of our life. Really, the Western world, America in particular, but the Western world in general, since World War II, that's the setting that all of us grew up in. We grew up in this, what I would call the post-war consensus or the post-World War II consensus. And this era of the world saw the rise of a certain ideology of nations and how peoples should relate to one another, should live within their nations, really to ideas of the good and the true and the beautiful. And so these ideas that have, whether you know it or not, shaped the world you grew up in, are very important to diagnose, I think. Basically because in this season, we're talking about the good, the true, and the beautiful and how to cultivate homes that hold and defend strong convictions of what it looks like to have a good and true and beautiful Christian household, and how to be the type of home that would radiate and defend these things and very strong metaphysical claims and very strong ideas of being. But these ideas have been under attack by the post-war consensus. So I wanted to talk in this episode about what the post-war consensus is, broadly speaking, where it came from, and why it really matters for us as we, as Christians, build households.
This is reminding me of so much of the stuff we're talking about in the kitchen episodes.
Yeah, tell us a
of
little bit
Roger
about what you're
Scruton's.
doing in the kitchen. In the
Well,
Kitchen, if you're not familiar, is our patron exclusive show that we put out every week or two on Patreon for people who support the show. Lexi's working through.
I'm working through Roger Scruton's book, Beauty. He's trying there's a chapter in here where he's trying to say we need to go back to positive societal, what's the word you were using? So consensus, like good taste. Remember I was talking to you
Yeah.
about this? In some ways, a taste for a good life in general post-war doesn't exist anymore, let alone beautiful things, let alone like healthy marriages. So some of what he's talking about in here is like we have to actually recover a good taste. And he does point out in different parts, he does bring it back to like the wars and stuff. But that was just interesting to think about. Like there used to be a societal consensus that this was a good way of living and this was a bad way of living. And now it's live your own truth. And it's so much that way that it's really hard for us to believe that actually everyone used to say there was such thing as good and bad taste. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and actually, if this could be a side, sort of byway that we could go down at some point. But when we talk about the post-war consensus, we'll see that these ideas did not just affect the political life. They're very much political ideas. They're politics forward ideas. It's an international liberal order of viewing how nations relate to global security and global peace and global markets and things like that. But one of the things that it deeply affected is the particularity of nations in how they expressed beauty in all areas of life. That would include art, media, literature, culture, architecture, their ideas of these things, the particularity of these things, the love of a person for his nation's particular architecture, for example, could be considered a bad thing, actually, under the post-war consensus. Or at least it could be an instinct that they would be very hesitant to endorse and would want to sort of weaken. And that's really the point of the post-war consensus. Do you have a quote, or should I? I think we're getting ahead of ourselves in terms of definitions. But why don't you? It looks like you have a
No,
quote.
I do, but I this is not going the way you probably planned it at all.
I don't care. Let's hear it, babe. Let's hear it. I'll give some I'll do my thing in a second, but let's hear it.
Okay, in much of our activity, we are home building, erecting in the teeth of change and decay the permanent symbols of a settled form of life, which change and decay has to do with war. The invisible hand to which I just referred moves of its own accord towards style, grammar, and convention. And this is what we witness in vernacular architecture, in folk costumes, in table manners, and in the customs and ceremonies of a traditional culture. Conventions create a background of unchanging order in our lives, a sense that there is a right way and a wrong way to proceed.
That's really good. That reminds me actually of there's an article I'm going to put in the comments, not in the comments, in the show notes, the description of this episode. It's by Ben Crenshaw over at American Reformer. I had been tweeting about this quite a bit, like 5 or 10 tweets about the post-war consensus. I did one kind of, hey, what do you guys think the post-war consensus is? In a paragraph or two later, hey, here's what I think it is. Here's my summary. Very much influenced by R.R. Reno in his book that I quoted from, Return of the Strong Gods, and then had been tweeting about it, and several people had. So Ben, who writes for American Reformer, wrote a great article. I think it's just called Post-War Consensus or The Post-War Consensus, and I'll link to it. And he is much more knowledgeable than me in the background political theory and history that went into the particulars of developing this liberal international order or the post-war consensus and how it kind of was developed. Super fascinating, long-form article that you could go read.
I'll have to read it.
He has a little snippet here that I'll read. I'm probably going to read a little bit from this article through the episode, but he said this. I thought it was really interesting. I think relates to what Scruton's getting at. He said, the liberal international order is not a political system. Politics proper had to be banished and something else substituted in its place. The political art involves two ends. So he's kind of defining this is what politics actually is. First, and most basically, a distinction between friends and enemies, and thus the willingness to fight to preserve oneself and one's way of life. And then second, and ultimately, the realization of the good life, a life of virtue and genuine happiness in concord with like-minded friends. These ancient political purposes were implacably opposed by the LIO, the Liberal International Order. The first was unthinkable because it created conflict and war. The second, because it presupposed the strong loves and attachment to family and nation, virtue and honor, religion and God that had supposedly led to the world wars.
That's really good.
Are you tired of not feeling well and of having your doctor treat your symptoms without taking the time to investigate what's really going on? Rebecca Belch owns Live Oak Integrative Health and is passionate about helping women and families achieve the health that God designed our bodies to have. She has been a critical care and labor and delivery nurse for 20 years and is a licensed practitioner of functional medicine. Her goal is to address the root causes of dysfunction in your body and to help you give your body what it needs so that you can create a legacy of health that extends to your children and grandchildren. She provides a wide range of testing options to uncover your underlying health issues, such as fatigue, weight gain, and gut problems. She then works with you to develop a plan that focuses on nutrition, hormone balance, and long-term habits to promote enduring health. She also specializes in health for women who will become or currently are pregnant. This time is often overlooked and is the most important window to create generational health. Contact her right now for a $50 discount on any of her service options. You can do this on her website, liveoakintegrativehealth.com, and that link will be in the description for you. If you have a young family like me, you work hard every day to ensure you care for your wife and kids. Providing for a young family is challenging, with rising costs, and it doesn't look like things are going to change in the future. Maybe you've thought like I have, I wish I'd started investing years ago. My family would be in a better financial position. As they say about trees, the best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago. The second best time is today. Don't let the benefit of time go to waste on your financial planning for retirement or inheritance for your generations. Joe Garrissey with Backwards Planning Financial has been working with us to make the best plan for our family. He's a Christian who works with one of the largest and most trusted financial service companies in the world. He's been helping Lexi and I work towards our financial goals and helps us navigate the complexities of the markets. Whether you have millions in assets or you're just starting to invest, Joe Garrissey can help you reach your goals to grow the kingdom and leave a good legacy for your generations. Visit backwardsplanningfinancial.com, that's backwardsplanningfinancial.com, or call 615-767-2555 to speak with Joe to prepare for the future. The testimonials presented may not be representative of the experience of other clients and are not a guarantee of future performance or success. If you're like us, the changing seasons wreak havoc on your skin, leaving us in constant search of a healthy product that actually works. Well, they're onto something at Gray Toad Tallow. We're talking about a natural, organic option packed with vitamins A, D, E, and K to moisturize your skin. The minimal ingredients are whipped into a velvety balm and have been known to soothe all kinds of skincare needs, from psoriasis, eczema, and dry skin to sunburns. Speaking of sunburns, if you want to avoid sunburn altogether, we are excited to introduce their tallow-based sunscreen. Sunscreen that's actually good for your skin. They also heard from the men, and though all can use it, they did create a lighter scent using sandalwood. So check out graytoadtallow.com and use code BRIGHT15, that's all caps, BRIGHT15, for 15% off your order, and all of that will be in the description for you. We should probably define a little bit what we mean here.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
people aren't
Did you
lost.
make this up, or is this something else?
No. I
Okay.
didn't come up with the concept of the post-war
Okay.
consensus. There are technical definitions of the post-war consensus that sometimes if you were to Google it, for example, you might find articles related to some specific political and economic situations in England post-World War II. But more broadly, the term I'm using here is one that many people have used. Again, R.R. Renault's book, Return of the Strong Gods, was really influential in popularizing this idea and help, but others have talked about it. Dr. Stephen Wolfe, Crenshaw, a lot of American reformer guys. If you're involved in the Christian nationalism conversation, then you will hear people refer to the post-war consensus as something that has set the default presuppositions of most Westerners today in ways that make them instinctually respond to certain older political ideas and ideas within Christian faith and theology and application and Christian political theory with like knee-jerk skepticism.
Yes.
Or even like, whoa, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So the post-war consensus, you could put it in a couple different ways. I think the most fundamental way, the easiest way to understand what it is and where it came from, is to start with the two world wars that devastated the West in the 20th century, World War I and World War II. So World War I and World War II, I'll give you a little bit of a narrative. The idea is that these wars resulted from what Renault calls strong gods, were very strong and heavy ideas of metaphysical claims, goodness and national identity and national destiny that led to essentially fascism. Take Germany. Germany becomes a fascist state and begins to essentially attempt to impose its will upon all of its neighbors and conquer and impose its way of life and all these, different evil things. And so coming out of World War II, the idea was, how can we never have this happen again? And so out of these world wars, how can we never have this happen again? A narrative developed that basically said the problem with fascism and with the nationalism and these sorts of things is cultural and national particularism, where a nation, loves its particularity and it develops a strong culture with strong metaphysical claims and strong conceptions of the good and the true and the beautiful. And then there's another nation next door that has its own strong metaphysical claims and these strong gods, strong religion, strong metaphysics, strong philosophy, strong ethics, strong ideas of beauty and good, of the good life. And what does this do when you have two differing, warring, strong opinions? Is that you have conflict. And so you have nations going to war with nations. So the idea was, behind the liberal international order or the post-war consensus, was we need to create essentially a globalist, supra-governmental collection or collection of powers that can govern over nations and weaken all of these strong gods that are going to cause conflict and create in their place a more malleable globalist culture that will include all sorts of different ways of eroding these particularities to cultural and national identities and replace them with something else. Globalism, basically. Relativism, basically. I wrote here, I'll read something I wrote about this. One of the hallmarks of the liberal international order or the post-war consensus is this idea that to prevent the danger of cultural and national particularism, which is the supposed mechanism for civilization threatening Nazism or fascism, Westerners have to adopt the matrix of universal cultural and ideological abstractions as the governing rules for culture everywhere. Cultures are no longer allowed to arise as the living outgrowth of a people and place, with all of the resultant local differentiation and particularity. Instead, we must learn to renounce hard metaphysical claims and focus on subjective personal meaning. Those who see the world through the lens of a highly particular metaphysical framework, who see the world in hard moral blacks and whites, are in danger of falling back into the fascism that brought on the world wars. So that brings us back to globalism. And just to provide one example of what this looks like in our day, a universalized cultural principle might look like this. America is an idea that anyone may adopt, not a people in a place. Therefore, anybody may become an American. So you could see how this would lead to an open borders policy in America. And we're a nation of immigrants. Instead of the truth, which is that America is a nation of settlers.
With its own culture to be assimilated into.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, and that we had a very particular culture, and we were a nation of settlers. Now the idea is we're a nation of immigrants. Anybody can become an American. You just have to adopt these ideas. And these ideas also happen to be the ideas of modern globalist liberalism that basically say no hard metaphysical claims, no particularity in nations. Those can develop too strong of an ethnic or national love that might lead to warring factions in the world and unrest globally. So you see how this would relate to something like beauty and architecture.
Oh, 100%.
Because, international architecture.
That's what I was going to say is I was reading Tucker Carlson's critique of the new international style, and he was saying they wanted you to feel like you were nowhere and everywhere at the same time.
Exactly.
Which is why it was international. It was everywhere. There was nothing particular about it anymore. It looked ugly here like it looks ugly in the UK.
Yep.
There was nothing distinct. And I think that's part of what Scruton was getting at too, in like the particular cultural traditions that made things ritualistically beautiful. China tea sets look that way for a reason.
Yeah.
It emphasizes the beauty in a ritual. And we just, Yep.
So you see a lot, like when you start to see this tendency of this supranational, international, liberal, global order that's attempting to basically say, we're going to be the police of the whole world and prevent anybody from doing, fomenting anything. The second something starts to, bubble up in a nation, we're going to go put a stop to it. We're going to go make sure that we weaken whatever loves or, lighten the theories of being there in that place.
I have a question.
And we're going to put it down.
So who were the people that said this, and what is that how the United Nations came to be? I'm trying to understand how they enforce this for real. Does that make sense?
Yes. On that point, I would definitely go and read Crenshaw's article because he goes through early attempts at this in things like the League of Nations.
Okay.
And he gives multiple examples.
Wondering.
He gives an example from, I think it's in Woodrow Wilson, basically the League of Nations example.
Mm-hmm.
This is like the post-World War I kind of early attempts at this. Woodrow Wilson had an idea for basically world peace through supranational organization. And it backed, like, it didn't work out. America basically said, no. America was still like, after World War I, let's get out of this stuff. We don't want to be the world's police. We don't want to be involved. You had a lot of isolationism that develops after World War I, basically saying, we don't want to get involved.
So that makes sense as to why they were so slow. Okay.
And why they were so slow to get
making more sense.
into World War II.
Okay.
I mean, it took essentially, well, it took a lot for us to get in, but we won't get into that right now. Roosevelt, et cetera. He traces this through basically multiple movements, and there's a lot of detail here at how we ended up with the United Nations, and then onward how this developed through Europe and through basically the entirety of the West. And there's multiple stages and there's multiple things involved in the post-war consensus. It's not just politics. It's also, you can see this in basically a globalist, militarism and kind of the security state, where allied powers within this liberal order, they have to cooperate to maintain total military control of the globe. And the justification is to prevent Holocaust 2.0, right? So we're going to need extreme concentration of military power, proliferation of advanced weaponry, large military industrial complex that's going to maintain this dominant, tons of money. So there's a military element there, and all of its supporting apparatus, this enormous trillions of dollars of military apparatus. That's then going to require you to have globalist economics in the welfare state and the maximal tax efficiency of extracting taxes. And also fiat currency plays into this, but funding all of that. So one of the things related to the post-war consensus is also, and this is why I thought it was relevant to Bright Hearth in particular, was the way that the post-war consensus affected how we think about economics and how we think about family. So I put this under part of my summary. Basically, post-war consensus includes globalist economics in the welfare state. So a combination of New Deal welfare economics, outsourcing to increase stockholder profits, Social Security, fiat currency, and more is necessary to maintain economic growth to fund global militarism and the superpower security state. These policies become maximally efficient as vehicles of taxation when households cease to be single-income households and transform into dual-income households. Welfare policy aids in this by providing strong incentives to single mothers. Social Security policy replaces large families working intergenerationally in cooperation with a state safety net for retirement. This, combined with a model of retirement investing that further disincentivizes generational wealth building and wealth transfer, redistributes economic power from families to large multinational and monopolistic corporations, which in turn, those corporations, they gain significant political power through lobbying and corruption. So families are further incentivized towards suicidalism for the sake of corporate power and profits via abortion, no-fault divorce, and more. Measures that support, these are the weakening of the family, the atomization of culture down to the individual as a maximally profitable economic unit. So families can't really be, if you think about it forever, how did people conceive of nations? Nations were basically a natural extension of families. So you would have a people and a place who would be families, essentially related to each other, a people that lived in a place, and they developed a culture, and they developed all these things around this sort of, but you would conceive of yourself as, like, let's say, I am Swiss. We are the Swiss people. We live in Switzerland, and we're this people. Well, you could see how the weakening of those loves would be necessary for the post-war consensus in the liberal international order to be ascendant. You have to weaken all those particularities and loves of Swiss people being Swiss. And now Switzerland is an idea too, and anybody can come and become Swiss. But really, that's the national level. The post-war consensus trickles all the way down to the family level at the base of those nations. So it not only redefines what a nation is, it also redefines what a family is. It basically erodes it and makes everybody into little economic units.
Yeah.
Along with a globalist economy that is one of the big mechanisms for this as well. Is that a lot of this sounds like super liberal, but hang on. There's also like a global capitalist side of this.
That's what I was going to bring up was this is reminding me of The American Way by Alan C. Carlson and Home Economics by Wendell Berry. In The American Way, he talked about how when they started trying to do equal wages, I think in like the 50s or 60s between men and women, but that was first for black men. They were trying to increase the wage for the black men to actually make a living wage so their wives could be home. But it was the Republicans in the courts who came in and said, well, at that point, actually, I don't think they were Republicans, because there's like the point in history when they switched, the conservatives of the time, quote unquote conservatives, they came in and said, hang on a second, we actually want equal wages for women too, attached to this bill or whatever it was, law, because of what you were saying, because that was more taxes that they could get if the woman made more money. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a dissolution of
so people,
the family.
And that was not the liberals of the day. That was, like you're saying, that was the capitalists of the day that were saying, no, we want to incentivize women outside of the home too.
Yes.
And that was in The American Way. It was very, very eye-opening to see that.
Very interesting.
Yeah, it was very interesting. So it was first for black men, so black families could be more stable. And then that happened as a result.
In the article that Crenshaw writes, he talks about how mass commercial production of goods, basically, if you think about the global market and mass commercial production, would over time be able to replace politics. And you go like, how would that happen? Well, he says, let me quote him so I don't get it wrong. He says, if national citizens could be reduced to mere consumers, they could be placated and formed into interchangeable economic units. If people's material needs could be satisfied on a mass scale, and if they could be endlessly entertained with food, work, Hollywood, iPhones, and TikTok, then their political agency, national distinctions, and natural drive for ambition could be repressed, or failing that, at least channeled toward global economic rather than political ends. So you see, think about this: the way that mass commercialism and globalism, global supply chain, has basically flattened out a lot of the particularity of national particularity. Basically, go anywhere in the world, what are people doing? They're on iPhones. Go anywhere in the world, what are people doing? They're driving Teslas. They're driving cars that look pretty similar. Go anywhere in the world, what are they doing? They're eating McDonald's. Go anywhere, like you start to see the way that mass commercialization is yet another way that you can decrease particularity and that you can make people dependent, not on their local people in place and producing things and national basically national production. Now it's like we outsource everything. We have this huge vertically integrated scale of production where nobody can make anything without China and India and Southeast Asia all cooperating together. And so politics has replaced politics on the national level. That politics of rewarding friends, living the good life as a people in a place is now replaced with a mass sameness that involves the erosion of strong and particular loves. So I thought that was interesting too, the way that global markets and the way that we think about economics plays into this. Another aspect of all of this that's really important to see is that undergirding it, the whole narrative was that essentially the Allies were these big, like, the superpowers, America, Great Britain coming together, the Allies were the white hats in World War II in every sense. And we saved the world from the wicked Axis powers, and everything they did was evil, and everything we did was good. So so now everything is Hitler, right?
I was going to say, are you coming out as pro-Hitler?
Absolutely not. No, absolutely not.
I know.
No, but if you think about it like this, you can do a two-step move now in the post-war consensus, where if Hitler did something and then you also say that something is good, people are like, well, Hitler did it. You're basically Hitler. Hitler really loved his people, and he talked a lot about, like, fighting against this is true. He talked quite a bit about fighting against the globalism and destruction of the German culture through Bolshevism and things like that.
What was it you said? There's a reason they don't translate his speeches for us?
Yeah, there's a reason that Hitler's speeches aren't typically like, you don't see videos often of Hitler. Every time you see him, it's just him going, "Kein Stein flying, kein Fly."
They're not trying to.
Because Germany, you could be saying, like, "I love butterflies," and
neutrally.
My wife, I think my wife is lovely, and it would sound like you were yelling about how you wanted to take over the world. Because a lot of his speeches, they're just kind of typical politician, like, no, they're attacking our people, we have to regain our family value, this kind of stuff. So now anything Hitler did or anything that Germany did is, well, that's fascism. And so if we see it in America, that's why Trump is literally Hitler and everybody's literally Hitler. And actually, one of the points of Renault's book, it kind of brings you through, I think it was 2019, maybe when it came out. So it brought you through to Trump is president, and Trump is a populist.
Interesting, yeah.
Trump is a populist who ran sort of on a strong national identity, closed the border. We're not like, even now with J.D. Vance as this VP, now this is mainstreaming where the Buchanan wing of Republicans are like ascendant now, opposed to the neocon globalist Bush era Republicans are totally out now. And a big centerpiece of what you're going to start to hear, like J.D. Vance saying that America is not an idea, we're a people. That is a rejection of the post-war consensus. That is blasphemy against the post-war consensus. So it's important that we start to understand these things and how they relate to the time that we're living in. Like, why are they trying to kill Trump right now? Because Trump is, just do the math, if the post-war consensus is true and Trump is trying to reawaken the strong gods of nationalism, then Trump is literally Hitler. And what wouldn't you do to stop Hitler, right? You see how this narrative forms. And so,
which is why those people keep saying he is the most dangerous threat to America.
Oh, yeah, he's like a threat to everything, basically. Yeah. Like, if Trump has his way pretty soon, it'll be like The Handmaid's Tale.
Are you pro-Trump now, Brian?
Yeah, I am pro-Trump. I voted for him last time. I'm going to vote for him again this time. But you'll see the way that they wage war against him is really revealing.
Yeah.
Because what you're seeing is a war in some ways between the post-war consensus weakening of being, as Renault would put it, lightening of being, and the weakening of our loves. And it's an attack on what they say is fascism. But it's really just an attempt to even in some way return to our older political ideas about what a nation was.
This is interesting because I was watching on House and Habit because she's at the RNC right now, and she was talking about, like, why is it that the party that used to be the the khakis and the blue blazers is now the cowboy party this year.
Uh-huh.
And it's just, she didn't really, maybe she did, I didn't finish watching, but she didn't really give her conclusion. But it's interesting because it makes me wonder if it's just one simple way to assume a past identity again, like an actual
Yes.
uniform.
Like we are Americans and we're proud to be Americans, and
Yes.
they're Western Americans.
Yes. Well, especially when you when you realize what the Texas Rangers were doing,
Right.
how bad they were.
Whoa, babe.
They were cool.
So edgy.
Yes, I'm so edgy.
Absolutely.
Anyways, yeah, so that's just because that is part of, I think we forget, moderns forget that clothing actually was something. It was an entire culture.
Yes.
You were communicating something. It was a class thing.
It was related to function.
Yes, so we forget, like, no, that really means something to people.
Yeah, again, to the mass commercialization. Now
Yes.
you can find basically mass-produced clothing. It eliminates, it flattens out all the particularity of nations and makes us. This is kind of anti-nationalism is at the foundation of the post-war consensus, is basically, again, the idea that what fueled this civilization-threatening Axis powers was really a love of country and a love of a way of life and the love of a particular people, strong moral standards against religious and cultural pluralism. So the idea is that we have to, basically therefore oppose these particular things, and replace them with a sense of globalism and basically pluralism. We tolerate virtually endless cultural and ethnic values to present the rise of totalitarian fascism. But it's what I think for Bright Hearth is really important to understand is that the only way to do that is at the root of it. You can't weaken national love like that without actually weakening family love. You have to, the root of the love.
You have to have both. You have to admit that it's going to do both. Harm to both is what you're saying?
Yes, okay. The word patriotism is helpful here. What does patriotism mean? It comes from the root word pater, or father.
Fatherland.
To be a patriotic person is someone who loves the fatherland. It's someone who, which is the land of my fathers. It's the land of my people. That's the idea. And so if you want to weaken being this, like, who are you and where are you from, you really are attacking the same root as the family love. There's a kind of sin that Paul warns against in I can't remember exactly where, but it's this storge. I think we might have talked about it before, is the Greek word. It basically just means, storge is like natural affection. To sin storge without natural affection is to sin in such a way that even like the pagans wouldn't do. It's like natural affection of a father for his son. If you sin in storge, it means it's like a father who abandons his own child. It's a brother who abandons his own brother. It's a man who hates his own fatherland. You're removing these things that God has wired into us. The love of a people, the love of a place, love of your family. They're all different levels of the same instinct, which is a good instinct. It can certainly go wrong. Sin can warp anything, just like sex is a good thing, but sin can turn it into a terrible thing. Storge, natural affection, is a good thing that can be turned into, all sorts of bad directions, where I love my brother and I hate anybody who's not my brother. Well, that would be a bad thing. But I love my brother more than a random person I don't know. That's not a bad thing. So globalism wants to say that in the liberal international order and the post-war consensus wants to say it's very dangerous for you to say, I love America more than other nations. But I think Paul would say, you're an idiot if you don't love your nation more than other nations. You live there. Those are your neighbors. Like, you'd better love them more. Because think about what it would mean for us if I love Kenya truly more than America, why am I not helping Kenya just as much as I'm helping America?
Yeah, this is one of the reasons I actually really loved Wendell Berry, is it started to help me understand where he was basically saying, like, you can only manifest the gifts of the Spirit under your roof first.
Yep, that's
and
right.
just as a mom to help me understand, like, okay, my affections shouldn't be scattered about in the city.
Yes.
They should be under my roof.
Well, and you know what? You can see a straight line from this kind of thinking to another pillar or another plank in the liberal international order that is grown ascendant, is like a Western-focused anti-natalism, where it's like, hey, white Americans don't have children because of what? What's the reason? Global warming,
Yeah.
overpopulation. Again, the globe is getting too full. You're not loving your neighbor in India if you have more children, and you're increasing your carbon footprint, and you're melting the polar ice caps and all of this stuff. And so you see how it plays together, that if you can get a people to despise their fatherland and their fathers and their family and their nation and all these natural affections, if you can get people to despise those, people who don't consider themselves a people don't bother to reproduce.
Yeah. I was telling Paige Van Vorst about Stephen Wolf's conference talk, which you guys should all go listen to. And she was like, oh, it's really good. The first time I was introduced to some of that stuff was reading What to Expect When Nobody's Expecting.
Yeah.
And I had heard her talk about that book for years and years and years, but I didn't realize that it was on such a political level that it was addressing. So I want to get that book and read it now. But
it's such a red pill. I know this is overused terminology now, but like it's just such a red pill once you understand the nature of what the liberal international order and the post-war consensus is trying to accomplish. You start to see how they were very successful at it in all of these different levels. One of the levels they were also very successful in, and this was really required, if you're going to subvert
I know what you're going to say.
the West, which is Christian, then you're going to have to develop a novel theological apparatus that Christians are taught to adopt as if it is and has always been what Christianity taught. So dispensationalism.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll say, okay, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, dispensationalism is one of these things. Basically, this could include lots of things. Let me give you an example that's outside of dispensationalism first. Religious pluralism as a positive good. The idea that Christians should be totally happy with their homeland being amenable to all religions equally. And of course, we're going to practice our religion over here in our churches, but you know, Hindu brother, I would die for your right to worship Shiva, you know, or you know, a Muslim neighbor, I would, you know, while I disagree with you, I would die for your right to worship Allah, and then so we're taught that we're to do this. And then we're taught this is what Christians have always believed. Hey, Christians, that's what the American founding was all about, was the separation of church and state. This is what the founders envisioned, was this religiously pluralist society where you'd have
what they meant by the separation.
You know, all of these different religions practicing. It's like, it's ahistorical nonsense.
Yeah.
We were a Protestant Christian nation at our founding. We had establishment at state levels in many states of different varieties. And we
different varieties of what? Explain a little further.
Of Christian denominations, where you'd have, you know, maybe you might have some Puritan establishment, a Presbyterian, and in New England, and you'd have in the South Anglicanism, and you'd have different pockets of different peoples.
And that was a good thing, you guys. I know some of you might hear that, and that might freak you out. That was a good thing.
Yeah, it was a great thing. That was what people came here to found.
To do that.
Nations, basically, states where they could live with their people and worship their God. But they were not, while we were always quite tolerant of people coming without attempting to subvert the nation to, say, another religion. You could be, even in early 19th century America, you could come through America, visit the towns, and be a Jew or be a non-Christian. And it's not like you would have been murdered immediately for being a non-Christian. What you couldn't have done, though, is move into the average small town and say, we're now going to build a huge mosque, and we're going to make everybody needs to listen to our Muslim call to prayer multiple times a day, and we want to establish like a halal market. That the tolerance didn't originally, it wasn't intended to be like that far. So not only did they have to come up with a novel theological apparatus within Christianity, this idea that religious pluralism is a positive good, we had to do this historical revision to convince Christians that, this is what Christians have always believed, that religious pluralism is good.
Would you also say that attached to the neonatalism part is universal education? Because if they're not going to have children, they need to take yours. And in order to get yours to come to their school, they need to kind of play it under the guise of, they all deserve it.
Well, it definitely infiltrated the public schooling system. And this happened before before the World Wars. But people are not familiar enough with the history of our schooling system,
Mm-hmm.
in especially like the extent of it.
Are you
Like
talking
we've
about
talked about this
American
before.
specifically, or are you talking about
Yeah, Americans,
like, all of history?
American history. Here at Bright Hearth, we're all about helping you not turn into a girl if you're a boy, or into a boy if you're a girl. You know what might be doing that to you? The soap in your shower. And so we are pleased to introduce you to IndigoSundrySoap.com, link in the description, of course, who can provide you with soaps and more without any of the nasty stuff. And because they love you, they're giving you a discount code, guys. So use code, all caps, Bright Hearth for 10% off your whole order. Support this great Christian company and support Bright Hearth Podcast at the same time. Check them out at IndigoSundrySoap.com. And of course, that link is in the description. Here at Bright Hearth, we love to support Christian family businesses that are doing great work, which is why we're so happy to commend to you A Well-Worn Story. A Well-Worn Story is a sewing studio based in New Glarus, Wisconsin, and they're making handcrafted leather and canvas goods. It's run by a husband and wife team, and they focus on making beautiful products from natural, high-quality materials that only get better with age, telling your unique story. Made in rural America, this Christian family business makes high-quality handcrafted leather and canvas bags, belts, and wallets, and these are heirloom quality, stuff that you can hand down to your next generation. You can order online at www.awellwornstory.com and use the discount code BRIGHTHEARTH, all caps, no spaces, to save 10% on any order. It wasn't like everybody went to school until they were 18 in America until well into the 20th century.
Until the Great Depression.
Right, because we want to prevent older teenage boys in particular from entering the workforce and competing with men for jobs when jobs are scarce. So let's actually expand secondary education, and we're now going to keep more. And then it becomes normative, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with people being educated till they're 18.
No.
That's not the point. But the point is that the amount of time kids were spending in public schools ballooned historically as the nation developed and as wealth increased and things like that. And the need for a 17-year-old to work to support a family decreased with the increase of wealth, the blessing of God in our nation. But also with that, the potency of education as a vehicle for indoctrination.
Yes, that's what I was getting at,
Wildly increased.
Because they don't have children to indoctrinate.
Yeah,
so they're going to take yours.
Antinatalism plus government schooling. The other, another idea that a novel Christian theological apparatus would be the idea that racial and ethnic multiculturalism is like a positive good, and opposing it for any reason is a sin. So this would be, and even some of you might have just gone, wait a second, is Brian saying racism is good? I just want you to see that that is the post-war consensus that has indoctrinated you. I said for any reason. So there are lots of righteous reasons why you might limit ethnic multiculturalism. And I'll give you one that I'm kind of playing with the grain of the post-war consensus with this one, just to show us how we think about this for everybody except white people. Let's say that you had a tribe in the Barbados or something like that had been undiscovered, and they had like this pristine culture, and we discovered them. And then the next day, the white Frenchmen said, we're going to go and we're going to immigrate to that culture. We're going to take it over, and we're going to make them love baguettes. Like, that's going to be the thing we're going to do. And our goal is that we're just going to make them multicultural. We want to get rid of their culture and kind of like melt it around and make it basically French or something, or some mix. And you go, well, hang on. Like, the post-war consensus, ironically, would say, well, that's like colonization, and that's all this.
Yeah.
There are, or Japan. In Japan is like 98% ethnic Japanese, and it has extremely low crime, extremely monolithic culture in many ways, and a high honor culture, like leave your door unlocked, very low crime, high cleanliness, high pride of ownership type of nation. And one of the reasons that is because they're very monoethnic. So they have a shared idea of people in place they all are invested in. If you just say basically any reason for opposing or any reason for being kind of skeptical of saying, hey, ethnic multiculturalism isn't always a positive good, that any kind of immigration restriction by a Christian people would be racist and evil, that the neighbor we're supposed to love is to be considered the distant third worlder just as much as our own countrymen and family. These are all novel theological ideas that Christians, again, were taught not only to accept, but also accept as if Christians always had believed these things, which they just didn't. These were novel theological justifications for the post-war consensus as a way of fighting for world peace via the liberal international order. There's a whole track that you could go down. We don't need to in this episode, but on dispensationalism and Zionism and the way that this worked itself out historically with the creation of the modern state of Israel. There's a lot that's related to that, but I don't think it's super relevant for Bright Hearth. So I guess I all of that to say, I kind of wanted to just close out for a few minutes and talk about what does this mean for us?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what does this actually matter? Because we're talking mainly to homemakers who are thinking about building homes that take hold of and defend and radiate truth, goodness, and beauty.
Mm-hmm.
We want you to love what the post-war consensus calls these strong gods that are very dangerous, and we're like, you should be loving these things, and you should be all about them. So, what thoughts do you have on this? How should this affect the way that we, as Christians building Christian homes, should be thinking and acting?
Well, I immediately think of Titus 2, like it means we should be lovers of husband, children, and home, especially because those are things that the other side does not like or want to acknowledge at all, any of those things. A second, like feet on the ground, it just is another like strong reminder that mother is a culture builder in the home.
Yes.
Like not to forget that even you going about your holidays and your Sabbaths and your meal times and your bedtimes without thought, it's not that there's neutrality there. It's just that there's a low view of culture there. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So it's just a reminder, like, no, it's kind of built into the way God made us. We should be seizing upon those moments too. I mean, like in Deuteronomy, when you're walking with your children, like those are opportunities to teach them about God, and it's building a culture along the way. So like for us, that means we're singing at the dinner table.
Yeah.
We're singing at bedtime. I'm setting the table at dinner. I'm thinking of the Sabbath as a feast every single week, a holiday, a mini holiday. Like, and it's cool because Scripture doesn't say like you have to have XYZ as your home culture. There is a lot of freedom there for individual family identities to flourish and personalities to flourish and gifts and talents to flourish in the home. But it is still a universal call, I think, that mother is the homemaker in the sense that you're building a culture that's flowing out of your front door.
Yes. I think that's the very first call that Christians need to embrace in repudiating the post-war consensus as it pertains to our Christian faith. We need to undo all of these novel theological ideas that they've convinced us to believe. A lot of them find their root in things like smearing the normal and ordinary love of your family, the creation and propagation of a particular family culture that is concordant with your people and your place.
Yeah.
That these are really dangerous idols. That you start loving these things, and pretty soon, bucko, you're going to be worshiping your family as an idol and your kids as an idol, and all the Gospel Coalition articles that are total garbage.
Yeah.
Because God made you to have strong love for your people. You're supposed to. You're supposed to love your wife and children, and you're supposed to pour yourself out in creating a place and carving out space of safety and cultural flourishing for your people, and putting your strength into that. And when you're doing that, it's not that love is in competition with your love for God. That love is an expression of your love for
Yes,
God as you
yes.
obey God in your duties to your people.
Yes, exactly.
So we need to start with this. Like, mothers need to embrace and basically say, I'm not going to be content with letting my home, the culture of our home, be a thin, globalist mass commercialism that is a copy paste of basically the latest gadget from global commercialism. And instead, I'm going to pour myself out into cultivating a particularism, a particular culture in our home, dinner table, our loves, our practices, and make it flow out of your Christian faith. So what else comes to mind? We're thinking about antinatalism, mass commercialization, global security state. I have one if you don't, but
Go ahead.
so one that comes to mind, I didn't unpack this, but I said something about how we've been taught that like retirement
Oh, okay.
and the way we think about retirement and wealth building. We've been taught, and we've been taught basically to funnel all of our money into the stock market, build up a 401k, live on that till you retire. And what I want to preface this by saying, I'm not saying that anybody who does that is sinning or anything like that. And it can be a great way of building wealth. Like, it's totally legitimate to do that, right? But my point that I want people to understand is that we actually need to remap the way that we're thinking about wealth building. One of the ways that this concept of retirement has really disrupted the natural affection within the family and the building of your people is a lot of these retirement plans, and they set you up to lock all of your money away until you're like 65 or 67. And then the idea is you would work until then, maybe a little bit past then. As soon as you have enough money, you would basically live on that, and you would try to spend your last dollar when you die, or at least maybe leave a modest inheritance. But your main goal is, I just want to make sure I'm not a burden, and that's fine. Like, you working hard, saving for the future. But what I would want parents to be thinking of, like what I'm thinking of right now, is that I actually want to be passing on inheritance as my children are coming into their early adulthood. And I want to be building my children's houses and their families when they're coming into early adulthood.
As opposed to waiting until the very end of your life.
When they're 65,
or when you're gone.
Leave them whatever stock money I have left. Yeah. I want to help my children basically build strong homes, strong households where they can have lots of children and they can do all of that. They can become hard workers. And I want to have a very strong intergenerational cooperation, again, because I have a God-given natural affection for my children. And I don't want my children to depend upon New Deal welfare economics and all this globalist capitalism, monopolistic capitalism, to put their stake in that. So I'm very much focusing, at least part of my strategy for how to build long-term in terms of wealth management and building wealth and handing it on and helping my children in my place in Ogden, Utah. That means that I would rather invest in the business of a friend or another family in the church that's coming up. And I mean really invest, like owning a portion of the company, giving them startup money, getting it going. I would rather develop a business incubation program out of St. Brennan's Classical Christian Academy for our young men as they come up with establishing businesses and getting own space here in Ogden. Why? So that we can stay, so that we can have economic weight to throw around. I would much rather do that and buy real estate and have people, my children, set up when they come into adulthood so that, they can have children. They're not looking at, the world is set against them having families with single incomes and building strong Christian culture. So what we need to be thinking about is, how can I do everything I can to not just give way to the post-war consensus where the government becomes the overlord and the family is weakened. I want to take back the power to the family and build strong loves there and let my love be backed up with economic action. Excellent. Well, I'm realizing we're coming up on an hour, so we should probably wrap up. I will say, I think we're going to do a whole episode on this on the King's Hall at some point in this current season that we're looking at Christendom 1.0. One of the things that we're hoping to do, I think, sometime in one of the upcoming episodes, will be to look at some of the differences between the ideas of a nation and a people in Christendom 1.0 compared to the post-war consensus and how that relates. And I hope that will be an illuminating discussion as well. Again, I'd encourage you to go read Ben Crenshaw's article, read Renault's book, Return of the Strong Gods. There's a lot of other reading that you could do that you'd find in footnotes and endnotes and bibliographies there, and links from Ben's article that are awesome and helpful. So I'm going to wrap up. I'm going to read this tweet that I wrote the other day on post-war consensus to sort of sum up and take us out. The post-war consensus is at war with strong metaphysical and ethical truth claims, which it sees as the seed of totalitarianism in both its fascist and communist expressions. Claims to absolute knowledge about truth, goodness, beauty, purpose, and moral ought, they believe, are what Renault calls strong gods, powers that will dominate and tyrannize any culture anchored to them. To bind these dangerous strong gods, the post-war West adopted a strategy of progressive weakening of all truth claims, a universal softening of all conviction. Strong convictions about the nature of being, the good, and meaning were bled to death in favor of an open society, a society with permeability coded into every level, permeable religion, permeable philosophy, permeable politics, permeable borders, permeable families, permeable ethics, permeable everything. Nothing can have a strong border. No idea, family, place, faith, nothing. We made convictionlessness our strongest conviction. But in the height of irony, it turns out that the open society is itself a strong God. To defend itself, it has to become increasingly impermeable. It has to defend the borders of its ideological clamp on society. It has therefore increasingly developed its own dogmas, its own sacred traditions, its own blasphemies and creeds, its own pantheon of strong gods. It turns out that strong gods are inevitable, one of those not whether but which sort of things. It's not whether or not you will have them, just which ones you will have. Will you have the incoherent and ultimately suicidal strong gods of the open and borderless society? Or will you have the true God, the one who can bind all the strong men, the one whose rule is peace on earth and in heaven? It really does sum up to the horns of the ancient dilemma man has faced since the fall. Christ or chaos? Christian nations or pagan ones? Impermeable holiness or permeable relativism degrading into totalitarian openness? There is no option for enduring, open, convictionless neutrality in any part of what it means to be human.